and welcome back to another in our series of Northern Road Link live streaming sessions. My name is Don Parkinson, and I'll be your host for this and other streaming sessions to be done over the next few weeks, focusing on the feedback that we've received on the Environmental Assessment Terms of Reference, or TOR, as we like to call it. As you may know, the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, also known as MECP, has extended the comment period for an additional 90 days until December 14th, 2022 for the 22 Indigenous communities that may be affected and or interested in the NRL project. So with that, we thought it would be helpful to share with you an overview of the comments we have received on the terms of reference. Today, uh, we will be doing this with the themes grouped under 5 categories. In the following weeks running up to the closing of the comment period, we will dive more deeply into each of the 5 categories or groupings of comment themes to help our audience get a better understanding of what we have heard about the terms of reference, which is also essentially the environmental assessment work plan. And we hope you enjoy these sessions. We're doing this to make sure we get those comments out there so people are aware of the feedback we've been getting about the project, and to, in our efforts to try to be as transparent as possible, basically. So why don't we get started now? Now, just to warn everyone, this is going to be done in a very rapid fire format. This is a half an hour long show, and we have many comment themes to go through. So I'm going to be moving quickly through this just to give you that big overview. And then, like I said, we'll be drilling down in over the following weeks to sort of better explain some of the nature of the comments that we've received. So let's get started now and move over to the what we call the EA process, or higher level EA comments. And if we can go full screen with this. Um, Now, what I'm talking about with that, if you can go back one slide, just to the title slide over the grouping. Um, the EA process higher level EA comments. What we're talking about with these is sort of the comments that relate to the EA process itself, and some of the comments, the sort of more general comments about the EA, that that are in the TOR, comments that are relating to what's in the TOR, higher level, not incredibly technical. So let's move on to the first topic, or the first um, type of comments that we've received under this heading. And the first one is regional assessment. So we've received comments on the need for a regional assessment, which is being undertaken actually by IAC. And so that is one area. And the next is 1EA. And so the comments related to this are talking about where people have suggested that if we can go full screen again, where people have suggested uh, that all 3 road projects be done under one environmental assessment. Next, we move to local and regional study areas. And these comments relate to the definition of these study areas, in particular the regional study areas. Um, Different communities or interest groups have pointed out that they think the study areas should be delineated differently. So those are the types of comments we've received. And then we have project owner and operator comments. Now, the project owner and operator comments relate to people or different communities or interest groups wanting to know who will be operating or owning the road once it's built. So those are some of the comments we've received under that topic. And then the final types of comments under the EA process, or higher level EA comments, is the nature of the mining activities in the Ring of Fire. So this relates mainly to future mining activities and what they might entail and knowing that information at this point. Next, we'll move to some of the EA technical comments, and there were a number of themes, many themes under EA technical comments, as you can imagine, because an environmental assessment is a very big study that consists of many studies underneath it. And so let's start with these. And one of the ones that we got was we received comments on was odor and how odor should be handled in the terms of reference and ultimately in the EA, because the terms of reference is the work plan for the EA. We also get a number of comments on commitments and monitoring. And this is an important area. Some of the comments related to community members or communities wanting to participate in discussions over commitments and participate in monitoring, which is which is all good. These are all good things, and you know, as typical with an environmental assessment, but even more so now than previously on projects, there are environmental commitments that are identified associated with an EA, and if approval is granted for an EA, it typically it comes with commitments and monitoring programs, sometimes for limited periods of time, sometimes for much longer periods of time, and so you know, these are important areas to discuss. So commitments and monitoring are quite prominent. Noise, we received comments on the noise studies that should be undertaken as part of this environmental assessment as well. We've had comments asking for details of specific mitigation measures. So, you know, at this point, the project team is only able to identify maybe general mitigation approaches that could be taken in situations where they see there might be, you know, impacts. And that typically, as a project goes on, you're able to better define mitigation measures. But there were a number of comments on that topic. Also, sensitive receptor locations. So this typically relates to um, uh, the sensitive receptor locations typically relates to, it could be noise, it could be visual environment as well. These are areas that are identified um, to look at that represent areas that might be sensitive to the project, and so other communities have asked for input onto these into these locations. We also received comments on the development and implementation of monitoring plans. So this is related to the commitments and monitoring mentioned earlier, um, very closely related actually, and it not only relates, as did the other one, where community members want to be involved in this, but it's just, you know, asking for more questions and or more answers as to what monitoring might entail post project and during construction as well. We also had questions about quantitative measurement of cumulative effects. So cumulative effects are the effects of not only this project, but any past, present, and what they call reasonably foreseeable future projects. So projects in the future that, you know, you could imagine occurring, and what the potential impacts, environmental impacts might be of those projects in combination with the impacts of this project. That's what cumulative means. So when they're talking about quantitative measurement, it's ways of measuring with numbers what those effects of all of those surrounding projects and the project we're studying are. There was also some comments on vegetation control methods. For example, use of herbicides to clear the corridor that for the road in the future. We also received comments on the impacts on fish and fish habitat, particularly at the crossing locations where crossing structures such as bridges or culverts of different sizes would be used to cross watercourses. We received comments on wildlife and wildlife habitat. A number of comments on those for very good reason, and so there's lots to talk about there. Plant and vegetation communities as well. Talking about um, medicinal plants and whether we're going to be, for example, mapping where medicinal plants are located, sensitive plants or plants that are of importance to community members as well too. We also received comments on what you call residual impacts. Now, what I mean by residual impacts, these are, in every environmental assessment, impacts are identified. And then you have the word I use a lot, as you probably heard me use many times. That word is mitigation. So mitigation is basically, if we can go back, that's it. If mitigation, it means basically controlling or limiting things. So mitigating impacts would be controlling or limiting impacts. Now, when all the mitigation measures are used and there are still some impacts left over, those are called residual impacts. So we did receive some comments as to how we would deal with residual impacts, ways of managing these residual impacts, compensation for residual impacts, things like that. And then another theme that was in our comments were factors used to measure habitat availability. Now, habitat availability is a combination of both habitat quantity and habitat quality. So um, this comment is, it's a much more technical comment, and we received a number of comments on this topic as well. Another interesting comment that we received, which was good to see, was the assessment was asking whether we would be assessing the likelihood of increased violence against Indigenous women and girls, and this is obviously a topic that's become much more prominent in the media, and it is definitely something that we are going to look at as part of uh, the environmental assessment. So there was a question about that as well. Aggregate quarries, of course, this isn't just a road. The road needs to be built with construction material, and rock is a big part of that construction material that builds the road, and it also has to be maintained with that construction material. So quarries are places where rock can be mined and then crushed into the right size to help both build the road and maintain the road. So aggregate quarries, their location and size and permanency as well too, whether they're permanent or temporary quarries. There were some questions about that as well. Um, there were questions on the negative socioeconomic effects of the project. So um, not just showing the positive effects of the project on the socioeconomics of the region, of the communities that make up the region, but also making sure that we mention the negative effects too, which would always be done as part of a comprehensive analysis. So we received comments on that topic. We received comments on alternatives. Um, so road alternatives, for example. The rationale for the choice of different alternatives and the input to determine those alternatives as well. We received input in the next theme group of themes. We received input on alternatives, water crossings, alignment, and aggregate sources. So a lot of those comments related to um, you know what was the rationale for different alternatives, what was the rationale for crossing at different locations, the alignment of the road, and the where we where has the sources of aggregate been located as well too. So a lot of comments on that topic. And then we had some comments on regional hazardous material spills and emergency response. So in the event of a hazardous material spill, whether there would be, plans in place, or what would the specific plans be with regard to emergency response to deal with those kinds of events. We also received comments on air quality, and the nature, asking about, the air quality studies that are being done on the project, looking at, dust levels, looking at emissions from during construction, during operation, and then post. During construction and then post-construction air quality measurements to understand any possible more lasting impacts in terms of air quality, and then health assessment as well too. So the mental and physical health of community members, and what those studies would entail too. So a wide range of technical comments were received, and this is just to give you sort of a overview of them. But let's move now to the next group of themes, tour comment themes that we have, and it's called climate change and water comments. We received a number of comments on this topic for good reason, and some of them related to climate change impacts and whether the project team is actually taking these into consideration. Some examples being, what specifications did we use for sizing culverts and ditches and things like that. So there were a lot of comments on that. So that's climate change impacts. And if we can now switch to the next group of topics, which is downstream and down muskeg effects. A number of comments on this for good reason, um, talking about the impacts the project might have downstream on downstream fish habitat and water quality, and then of course muskeg, effects of building in the muskeg too, which we have talked about a number of times and we'll be talking about more in the future. The muskeg has obviously involves a slow moving sheet of water across it in a direction, and part of the challenge of building roads in these areas is to make sure that that water is still able to move, um, slowly as it is, across that road that's being built across it. So that's a big area. We also had comments on groundwater and the types of and nature of the groundwater uh, studies that are being done, and on surface water as well. And uh, and also the interaction between the groundwater and surface water. So there were comments on quality, surface water and groundwater quality and quantity and seasonal measurements and those kinds of comments. And we'll get into those, in those when we have those sessions in over the next few weeks. We also received some community related comments, and these are comments that that were from the community, talking about a number of different things. And let's look at the first one, which is alignment of the consultation approach with the community's protocol. So many communities have their own engagement protocols, which when we typically, before we typically go to a community or visit a community to talk about the project, we'll try and find out what their engagement or consultation protocols are, and make sure that our approach is consistent and respectful of those protocols. So there were a number of comments talking about the importance of doing that, of making sure that we're respecting communities' consultation protocols. We also received some comments on the inability of communities to participate effectively in the consultation process because of a lack of technology or connectivity, internet connectivity, bandwidth in their communities. Now, this problem has lessened to some degree, I think, over during COVID. But it's something that still exists, and it was brought up, and that's why we want to make sure we share that with you. There was a couple of other comments on site visits by neighboring community members, and this is an interesting one, and definitely one I think that our team would entertain, would happily entertain, and some communities have suggested they would like to participate by visiting some of the key locations along the route, to understand better, firsthand, on site, what what the environment is like at these specific key locations, key project locations. So that was another topic that I thought was interesting. A couple of communities brought up comments on that topic, and then another one, which is quite general, but it's still important though. It's greater involvement in the project by community members, not only community members from the proponent communities, Martin Falls and Webequie, but by other communities in the region as well too, and having a say, having some input on different aspects of the EA. This the comments were wide ranging under this topic, but there were a number of comments that talked about this. There were also still some comments on COVID accommodation as well too. As you know, we've been receiving comments on the tour for a lengthy period of time. There were a number of communities that said that they were unable to engage with us effectively because of the COVID issues. We understand that, and so we received a number of comments uh, talking about that as well. We also had comments on the ability of neighboring communities to benefit from the project, asking how they could possibly benefit from this project, and whether the benefits of this project would be shared with neighboring communities in the sense of employment and training and procurement, those along those different lines. So these were all very helpful, useful comments for sure under the community related comments grouping. And then the other grouping, we had was Aboriginal and treaty rights and interest comments, and these the comments of this nature were often distributed through the other categories. But one theme that did come across was the terms of reference and UNDRIP, which is of course the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and how UNDRIP would be integrated with the terms of reference. So those were really interesting comments. But a lot of the Aboriginal and Treaty Rights and Interest comments, or the ATRI comments as we like to call them, were sort of sprinkled throughout the other comments as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move along. So as you can see, there was a lot to talk about, or we have a lot to talk about, and there were a lot of different types of comments. I don't even have the exact number of comments we received. It's well over 1,000 comments to date. I'm sure I will get the final number. So there's a lot, and we certainly can't share every single comment. We just have to group them together and try and pick through them and share as many of them as possible, so you get as good a sense as possible about the kind of comments we received. So as you can see, there's a lot here, and so those shows moving forward are going to, as I mentioned, dive a little bit more deeply into each of those groups, and so we'll drill more deeply into them so you get a better idea of what those comments were. And I want to just thank everyone. We're getting ready to close. I just wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to sort of join us for these streaming sessions. It's really important that you do. We have a lot of information to share. We're trying to be as transparent as we can be with this project, and we'll be back again in a couple of weeks when we continue our discussion of what we heard on the environmental assessment terms of reference. And next week we will be able to take calls as well. Today was more of an overview. I'm telling you about the topics, but next week we'll be able to take calls and try and answer your questions, or at least take your questions and give you responses later, and try and respond as much as we can. And I just want to remind Indigenous communities and the general public that they can engage with the project team in a number of ways. So this is only one way. Um, our door is always open. We want to meet with you in whatever way is most convenient for you. So we have, and you've probably seen this in some of the letters that we have sent via email, we have proposed lots of different engagement methods, whether it's focus group sessions or community meetings or sessions, drop-in sessions, virtual focus groups, virtual community presentations. We do virtual community presentations, um, and like Zoom-like meetings, things like that. Um, Teleconferences. We can do a local radio show in your community as well too, talking about the project. We have online surveys that are available for you to complete. So there's lots of different channels or ways that you can provide us with input from your community about the project. So just wanted to point that out to everyone. And as you can see on the screen here, you can reach us in a lot of different ways. We have a 188 phone number. We have our email. We have our website. Our project website is northernroadlink.ca. There's a ton of information on this website. It's always changing. In fact, this video will go up on the website very shortly after the presentation. So we try to share as much as we can with you. It may seem sometimes like we're trying to overload you, but we're not. We're just trying to share everything so you can see what we're up to on the project. So thanks again for joining us this week, and we will see you again in 2 weeks when we are going to dive into our first topic, which is the EA process and higher level EA comments, and then we'll dig a little deeper on what we did today. So thanks again for joining us, Miigwech, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks.